$110 billion. That's the number everyone is talking about, the largest private funding round in the history of technology. OpenAI just raised nearly 2/3 of what the entire US venture capital industry deployed across all of 2023 in a single round. And every headline is saying the same thing. OpenAI has won. The AI race is over. Pack it up. But here's the thing nobody is saying out loud. Look at who wrote the checks. Amazon, Nvidia, SoftBank. Now look at what they got in return. Exclusive cloud distribution rights, locked-in chip orders for gigawatts of compute, hundreds of billions in guaranteed server contracts. This wasn't an investment, it was a purchase order, dressed up as a funding round. And the implications of that distinction are far bigger than most people realize. This deal landed on February 27th, 2026, and within hours, it reshaped the entire landscape of AI infrastructure. Not because of the dollar amount, though that's staggering, but because of what the deal structure reveals about where AI is actually heading. We're at an inflection point. The era of AI as a scrappy software startup is over. What's emerging is something that looks a lot more like heavy industry, where the winners aren't determined by who has the best model, but by who controls the energy, the silicon, and the real estate. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how this deal works, why the investors aren't really investors, and what it means for anyone building on, working with, or betting on artificial intelligence. To understand what just happened, you need to rewind about 18 months. In early 2025, OpenAI was riding high. ChatGPT had crossed 400 million weekly active users. Revenue was climbing toward $10 billion annually. The company had closed a $40 billion round led by SoftBank, itself a record at the time at a $300 billion valuation. Sam Altman was making the rounds, talking about trillion-dollar infrastructure build-outs, gigawatt-scale data centers, and a vision so enormous it made even Silicon Valley veterans uncomfortable. The plan was called Stargate, $500 billion in AI infrastructure, data centers the size of small towns, enough electrical capacity to power millions of homes dedicated entirely to running and training AI models. Partners were lined up. Oracle signed a 5-year, $300 billion cloud computing deal. Nvidia was in talks for a $100 billion infrastructure financing agreement that would see OpenAI deploy at least 10 gigawatts of Nvidia systems. SoftBank committed through its energy subsidiary to build gigawatt-scale campuses in Texas. The message was clear. AI was going to be the most capital-intensive technology ever built. And OpenAI was going to be the company that built it. The trillion-dollar number wasn't a goal. It was a declaration, but then something shifted. By late 2025, cracks appeared. Nvidia's $100 billion deal stalled. The Wall Street Journal reported in January 2026 that people inside Nvidia had concerns about the structure of the arrangement. Analysts started asking uncomfortable questions. How was OpenAI, a company that wasn't yet profitable and was burning through $8 billion a year, going to pay for $1 trillion in compute? Where was the revenue going to come from? Even at $13 billion in annual revenue, a number OpenAI hit in 2025, the gap between what it was earning and what it was promising to spend was almost incomprehensible. Then came the short sellers. Jim Chanos, the man who helped expose Enron, and Michael Burry, who called the 2008 housing crisis, both went public with their concerns. They compared the AI financing web to the circular schemes that destroyed Lucent and Nortel during the dot-com bust. Chanos pointed out something uncomfortable. When the demand for compute is supposedly infinite, why did the sellers keep subsidizing the buyers? OpenAI quietly adjusted. By February 2026, the company told investors it was targeting roughly $600 billion in total compute spending by 2030, less than half the $1.4 trillion figure Altman had been promoting months earlier. Revenue projections for 2030 were set at $280 billion, split between consumer and enterprise. The narrative shifted from growth at all costs to show us sustainable economics. And then on February 27th, the big round dropped, $110 billion. 3 investors, and a deal structure that tells a very different story than the headlines suggest. Let's break this down investor by investor, because the details matter more than the total. Start with Amazon. $50 billion, the single largest chunk. Sounds like a massive vote of confidence. But read the fine print. Amazon's commitment starts with $15 billion up front. The remaining $35 billion comes later, quote, when certain conditions are met. Nobody has disclosed what those conditions are. But it's what we do know about the rest of the deal. Alongside that investment, Amazon announced a multi-year strategic partnership with OpenAI. AWS becomes the exclusive third-party cloud distribution provider for OpenAI's new Frontier Enterprise platform. OpenAI's existing $38 billion AWS agreement gets expanded by another $100 billion over 8 years. And OpenAI committed to consuming at least 2 gigawatts of Amazon's Trainium compute, Amazon's custom AI chips. So what did Amazon actually buy for $50 billion? It bought a customer. The largest, most compute-hungry customer on the planet, locked into its cloud for the better part of a decade. The investment is functionally an advance on a cloud services contract. It's a customer acquisition cost, except the customer is a $730 billion AI company. Now, Nvidia. $30 billion. This one is even more revealing. Nvidia's entire business depends on selling AI chips. And what does Nvidia get from this deal? OpenAI has committed to deploying gigawatts of Nvidia's next-generation silicon for both inference and training. Nvidia isn't betting on OpenAI's future. It's securing its own order book. This is what analysts have been calling circular financing. Nvidia gives OpenAI $30 billion. OpenAI uses that money, plus billions more, to buy Nvidia chips. The money goes out the door and comes right back. It's not fraud. It's not illegal. But it's not a traditional venture investment either. It's a supplier financing its own demand pipeline. And remember, this isn't the first time Nvidia has done this. The company has invested in CoreWeave, which buys Nvidia chips. It's invested in xAI, which buys Nvidia chips. And OpenAI itself struck a parallel deal with Nvidia's competitor AMD, receiving warrants for up to 10% of the company in exchange for deploying 6 gigawatts of AMD chips. Even the competitors are getting pulled into this interlinked web. The pattern is consistent. Invest in the customer, guarantee the purchase. But wait, we haven't even talked about the biggest entanglement. And it isn't part of this funding round at all, it's Oracle. In 2025, OpenAI and Oracle signed a deal worth $300 billion over 5 years. Oracle would build massive data centers, including the flagship Stargate campus in Abilene, Texas, and OpenAI would consume the compute. To put that number in context, $300 billion over 5 years is $60 billion a year. Amazon Web Services, the largest cloud provider on Earth, makes well over $100 billion a year. OpenAI alone was promising to spend more than half of that with a single vendor. When Oracle reported its earnings in September 2025, the company revealed that its remaining performance obligations, essentially future revenue from signed contracts, had surged to $455 billion, up 356% year over year. A massive chunk of that is OpenAI. Oracle's CEO projected cloud infrastructure revenue growing from $18 billion that year to $144 billion by 2030. The math only works if OpenAI pays. Think about what that means. Oracle, a company that made $14.9 billion in quarterly revenue, has staked its entire growth trajectory on a customer that has never turned a profit. Oracle's stock soared 36% on the earnings report, its biggest single-day gain in over 3 decades because investors believed the backlog was real. But Oracle doesn't own its own data centers. It partners with Vantage Data Centers, which is taking on $38 billion in debt to build the Stargate facilities. If OpenAI can't pay, Oracle's growth story evaporates. If Oracle can't build fast enough, OpenAI's compute roadmap stalls. They're handcuffed together. And here's where the circle closes. To fulfill its end of the deal, Oracle has to spend tens of billions buying hardware. From whom? Nvidia. Oracle reportedly ordered 400,000 of Nvidia's top-tier GB200 chips at a cost of around $40 billion, just for the Abilene campus. So now follow the money. Nvidia invests $30 billion in OpenAI. OpenAI pays Oracle for cloud compute. Oracle pays Nvidia for chips. Nvidia books the chip sales as revenue. The cash doesn't leave the circle. It just moves around, each stop generating a transaction that each company reports as growth. This isn't a conspiracy, it's the architecture of an industry that needs more capital than any single company can generate. But the structural risk is real. If any one node in this chain stumbles, if demand for AI slows, if models get more efficient faster than expected, if revenue doesn't materialize at the scale projected, the whole web gets pulled tight at once. Bain & Company estimated that AI companies will need $2 trillion in annual revenue by 2030 to justify the infrastructure being built today. Current projections fall about $800 billion short. The numbers for now don't add up. Now, some people will hear all this and say, so what? Big companies invest in their biggest customers all the time. This is just vertical integration, standard business. And that's partly true, but let's really stress test that argument. There's a historical parallel here, and it's not the one most people jump to. Everyone keeps comparing this to the dot-com bubble. And yes, the telecom analogy is real. Lucent Technologies in the late 1990s aggressively lent money to its own customers so they could buy Lucent equipment. It booked those loans as sales revenue. When the customers couldn't pay, Lucent collapsed. Nortel did the same thing. The financing structures rhyme with what we're seeing today, but the more precise parallel is actually defense contracting. Think about how the US military-industrial complex works. When Lockheed Martin helps fund a government weapons program, it's not charity. It's not even really an investment in the traditional sense. It's securing a decades-long procurement contract. The investment is inseparable from the guaranteed purchase. The company that finances the program is the same company that builds the jets, the missiles, the systems. The customer and the supplier are locked together for a generation. The US defense industry runs on this model. A small number of massive contractors, Lockheed, Raytheon, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, locked into long-term relationships with their biggest customer where the lines between supplier and partner blur completely. Competition exists, but it's structural competition. You compete for the contract, and once you win it, you're in for decades. AI infrastructure is developing the exact same dynamics. A small number of companies, Nvidia, Amazon, Microsoft, Oracle, Google, now control the chips, the cloud, the energy, and the data center real estate that every AI company needs to operate. And just like in defense, the investments are really about securing position in a supply chain that's hardening into something permanent. This is the moment AI stopped being a software industry and became a heavy industry model. The moat isn't the algorithm anymore. It's the power plant. It's the 5-year cloud contract. It's the chip allocation. And the companies writing the biggest checks aren't venture capitalists making a bet. They're infrastructure providers locking in a generation of demand. The difference between the dot-com analogy and the defense analogy matters. If this is a dot-com replay, the whole thing crashes when demand disappoints. But if this is a defense-style build-out, the infrastructure persists even if the original rationale shifts because the contracts, the dependencies, and the sunk costs create their own gravity. The question isn't whether this web holds. It's whether anyone can escape it. So what does this actually mean for you? 3 things. First, OpenAI's independence is now structurally compromised. not in some dramatic, hostile takeover way, in a quieter, more permanent way. OpenAI's compute runs on Amazon's cloud. Its chips come from Nvidia's roadmap. Its data centers are built by Oracle. Its energy infrastructure is managed by a SoftBank subsidiary. Every critical layer of the stack is now controlled by a company that is simultaneously an investor, a supplier, and a business partner. That doesn't mean OpenAI is a puppet. It still has 900 million weekly active users. It still has 50 million paying subscribers and 9 million business customers. It brought in $13.1 billion in revenue last year. Those numbers are real. But strategic flexibility, the ability to switch providers, renegotiate terms or pivot infrastructure, it gets harder every year as these contracts deepen. The switching costs aren't just financial, they're architectural. Second, the cost structure of AI is being determined not by model efficiency, but by infrastructure lock-in. This matters enormously for anyone building on AI platforms. If you're a startup building on OpenAI's API, your costs are ultimately determined by what Amazon charges OpenAI for cloud, what Nvidia charges Oracle for chips, and what Oracle charges OpenAI for compute. You're 5 layers removed from the actual silicon, and at every layer, someone is taking a margin. Watch for pricing, watch for switching costs, watch for whether open models hosted on AWS or Azure are truly portable or quietly locked into proprietary infrastructure. The next wave of AI competition won't be about who has the best model. It'll be about who can escape the infrastructure tax. Third, and this is the biggest one, the AI industry is now systemically interconnected in a way that amplifies both success and failure. If AI demand keeps growing at the pace these companies project, OpenAI is targeting $280 billion in revenue by 2030, then every node in this web gets richer. The circular financing becomes a virtuous cycle. Everyone wins. But if demand plateaus, if enterprise adoption slows, if a major efficiency breakthrough makes current infrastructure overkill, then the same interconnection that amplified growth will amplify the contraction. Nvidia's revenue depends on OpenAI's spending. Oracle's stock price depends on OpenAI's ability to pay. Amazon's cloud growth depends on AI workloads materializing at scale. One company's stumble becomes every company's problem. This is what systemic risk looks like, not a single point of failure, but a web of mutual dependency where everyone's business plan assumes everyone else's business plan works out. At the top of this video, I told you that $110 billion doesn't mean what everyone thinks it means. And now you've seen why. Amazon, Nvidia, and SoftBank didn't bet on OpenAI. They bought guaranteed demand for their own products, cloud services, chips, and data center capacity, and structured the purchase as an investment. The capital doesn't flow in one direction. It circulates. And that circulation is the real engine of the AI boom. That's not inherently bad. Every major infrastructure build-out in history has been financed this way, from railroads to telecoms to defense. The question isn't whether the model is unusual. The question is whether the demand is real enough to sustain the debt, the contracts, and the interdependence that's been built on top of it. Here's a prediction to hold me accountable. By June 2026, at least one of the certain conditions governing Amazon's $35 billion tranche will become public. And when it does, it won't be tied to an AI product milestone. It'll be tied to AWS consumption minimums, confirming that this was always about the cloud contract, not the company. Timestamp your own prediction in the comments. Let's see who gets it right. If this kind of structural analysis is what you come to this channel for, you already know what to do. I'll see you in the next one.